looking forward to it. So yeah.
Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna start. Welcome to Wellness and Wonder for another amazing episode with this beautiful woman called Mbali. So today, what is about? Today, we're going to talk about important values to adapt to our well-being, to become aware of what we can be and what we want to be. Surprisingly, the way we define ourselves often has little to do with what we do or what we own. But when we talk about ourselves, we often end up describing what we do or what we have. Partly, we do this because it's easy to define ourselves these ways in casual conversations, like when we meet someone new on a date or waiting and wanting to have like casual conversations that are quite superficial. This is not a proper investment, and it is a temporary interaction that is defined as small. So in that case, when I met Mbali, the situation was totally different. Our conversation got deep, and I couldn't wait to talk to her online for all of you. Welcome to Wellness and Wonder, Mbali.
Thank you for having me, beautiful. Like, well, I don't know if to say thank you, Francesca, but like, yes, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome, dear Mbali. So, of course, I prepare many questions, as always, as I love to go deep with people I admire. But first of all, tell us a bit about you. How do you define yourself?
Yeah, I mean, just even listening to your intro now, and I totally agree in the fact that like when you meet people and the first thing is like, what do you do? And they go straight into like the profession. And rather than saying, who are you? Like, you know, who are you as a human being rather than what you do? And I think for me, it's always funny because when people ask me, what do I do? I'm like, I don't know. Like, like it's one of those where I do so many different things that even for myself, that definition changes and evolves. I mean, what do I do that pays my bills? What does the 9 to 5? I'm a workplace consultant, but I also am a change manager. I'm an activist for like change in terms of transformation and trying to just help people be their best selves. I'm also like a mentor, like a youth mentor. So I do a lot of different things. And for myself, like, what do I do? I think ultimately, if I could put it as a tagline, I would just try to help people be their best selves, and also show them that there are other ways of doing things. And yeah, just trying to show them that change can be difficult, but we can all go through it and ultimately, like, you know, progress and evolve on the other side through it. But
yes,
yeah.
and the most needed people in this world, I believe, are leaders that are also healers. And it's not all about leadership, it's about depth in leadership, which is totally different. So I would say my first questions regarding what you just said, Mbali. So I believe we must explore our core values and traits to become effective leaders. So you are a mentor in leadership skills and the qualities at work, because I know you, and that can help advance career and lead to having a greater overall satisfaction. So, but regarding what I just said in the introduction, what is that you truly see in the person in front of you before guiding the person you are basically talking to? Do you really see them through, or do you ask what they do in life to push them toward their goals and forward?
I think it's multifaceted in the sense, like, if I think about it from how I approach it for work in terms of what we do, because it's more in the corporate world and it's more about trying to, you know, achieve the business objectives. I ask the questions around that in terms of more like maybe performance or being more effective or whatever it is that as a goal they are trying to really achieve for their business or their team. But right now, if I'm just actually focusing on like a one-to-one coaching, or actually try to, if I'm having that one-to-one session, it's about the individual in terms of like, why are we actually having this conversation first and foremost? Because that's the most important thing for me. And then from there, it's like, what do they want to achieve? What is that desired goal? But ultimately, it's not about having like, you know, to 20 questions or an interview. It's about having a conversation, and through that conversation, understanding, because one person might be saying, hey, I want to, you know, lose 10 pounds. I don't know, let's say I want to lose 10 pounds in X amount of time. But through the conversation, you actually realize that's maybe your end goal, but that's maybe not the thing we need to focus on right now, because there's actually so many other underlying things that might be the blockers ultimately of you not being able to achieve that goal. So it's more about having the conversation and understanding the person and who am I actually speaking to, who's connecting with me, and getting to have a better grasp around that.
Amazing. And also, I talk about me. It's not that, for example, I don't use what I do or what I have to define part of my life in specific situations, but it's that no longer I use my old concepts of limitation to rule my life. This is an interesting point I always think about when I put myself on the other person. So the other questions, dear Mbali, becoming a leader that requires that you demonstrate specific abilities in your approach to work in guiding others. Which are your main abilities as you define yourself?
My main abilities, I think for me, and whether it's for myself and actually what I'm also trying to do and instill as a whole, is trying to create a world where we have emotionally intelligent leaders. And that's one of those things that for me, I think is, especially in the times that we've had for the last 2 years now, I can actually say that. And we've passed the 2-year mark. I think now more than ever, with everything that people have been going through, this is a time to actually create a human being that's more like has more self-awareness, that's really oozing out, compassion and empathy, because it's one of those situations where nowadays everyone has been struck. Like I've been saying it for the longest of time, that we've all gone through trauma, whether we want to accept it or not. The whole world has been traumatized on the spectrum of it. And yes, unfortunately, when we talk about trauma, I mean, people, that's a very convoluted conversation and a very multifaceted one in itself. But just to stay, at a very light touch of it, I say we've all gone through our own level of it and experiences. Some people may accept it, some others may be still completely in denial. But I think for me, it's about being able to show compassion and empathy, because I think that's the only thing right now that allows us to, first of all, put ourselves in the shoes of others, even though we may have not experienced their experience, just being able to say, like, I hear you, and not trying to belittle their own personal experiences. Because I feel like in life right now, at least in terms of my own personal experience, it's always been a competition of who has suffered more than the other, or it's always a comparison of some sorts. Yeah. So coming back to your original question about like, what do I try and instill within leaders? I think it's that compassion piece. But in order to have compassion for others, and this is what I'm also continuously learning, is that you first need to have compassion for yourself. I think that's the hardest part there, of actually giving it to yourself.
Beautiful what you said about the emotional awareness, Mbali. In fact, in order to have also difficult conversations and use feedbacks effectively while growing our own skills and inner powers, emotional awareness is fundamental. Thank you so much for mentioning it, Mbali. And why do people lack of this emotional awareness? Does it come from their past, their lack of depth? What do you think? Why do people have these problems of not recognizing this importance of the emotional awareness while growing toward leadership?
I mean, I think the way that I see it is twofold. So you first have like the education system that we have nowadays that still unfortunately doesn't really focus. It focuses on the IQ in terms of your intelligence quotient, but doesn't focus on your EQ with regards to your emotional quotient. And I think that's one of the things that I know for myself personally. I only found out about all of this much later, in my early 20s. I didn't have anything related to this at school, or even any type of awareness about it. Yeah. I do know that nowadays schools are instilling a new, like they're trying to instill sort of new well-being and health like courses, but is it actually targeting what we really need to address? I don't know. So I think the education system as a whole needs to sort of get up to speed with what we're currently facing and the multifacetedness of what it means to be a human being as well. So not just focusing on intelligence, but actually the emotional aspect of it, which is the soft skills, as they say, once you go start working and being in your professional world. But then another thing as well is that if you don't get it from your educational system from like school, there's another part called another educational system, which is at home. And the thing is that I know for myself, I mean, love my parents a bit, but they were not taught it, so they didn't have the tools to be able to instill that within myself, and vice versa. So there's been that vicious cycle, and I know for myself right now, I'm on that journey of wanting to break that vicious cycle and making sure that with my future children or any type of like younger generation that I do have the ability to be in interaction and contact with, to just be mindful and thoughtful of that. But I think it's really just the reason why it's more about just generations. I mean, if you think about your parents or your grandparents, they were coming out from a completely different system in a different world where thinking about emotions, that was not the priority. It was more about being in survival mode, just putting food on the table. So I totally get it. And I think it's one of those things where now is, I think, the best time ever to actually try and put this at the forefront of our conversations, especially when you have the highest rate of like depressions between 9 to 14-year-olds. Like it's what I didn't know what depression was at 9, but yet unfortunately we are in a society where the 9-year-olds of today or the 10-year-olds of today are facing that. And for me, it's just mind-blowing that unfortunately we've gotten to such a point. And then unfortunately on top of that, it's them not even having the tools for themselves to be able to try and cope and process, and rather they're just like going in a space of repressing, which is not good. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question the way you
Beautiful answer. Education, it includes everything. It's so true what you said, Mbali. And it changed so much along generations, like you said, because of the system that was changing following. Yes, thank you, Mbali. And I feel you are a coach, okay? So I define you in this moment as a coach, even though there is so much more. And the coach is someone that offers their skills and knowledge, like you're doing, and experience, like you're doing, to help individuals to improve their own abilities. In your case, which are the experiences that brought you where you are, that brought you to this mission of guiding others? If you can share it here with us.
I actually do not know what's the first like the first experience. Okay. I would actually be completely, so let me try and make a long story as ever short as I can possibly can do. I think the way that I ended up to where I am today has to yet again do with society and the way that we're programmed and what society values. So I know for myself, I had done a master's in management consultancy and organizational change. And the only reason back then, the reason why I had done that master's was because I was busy working still as a workplace consultant and also starting as a change management, behavioral change management consultant. But I always felt like when I would go in the room, I'd be saying certain things, but people not necessarily listening to what I had to say or not taking me seriously. So I thought, okay, if I at least I have a master's with me, then they can be like, oh no, she studied this. Let's like she maybe listen to what she has to say. And so I went through that process. It was a hell of an experience. I mean, I would never recommend working full time and also studying full time, but I did that. I got over the I actually managed to do it. Even I was surprised I got a merit out of it. Anyway, but it was a very like stressful period of my life on all fronts, professionally, personally, emotionally. But one of the main key experiences that I cannot like, and I'm so grateful for, even though it was like very challenging, is the fact that I went into that master's thinking I wanted to get one thing out of it, i.e., having a master's degree and being like, hey, now like I have a piece of paper to prove that what I'm saying might actually mean something. And when I got out of the whole experience was something completely different, because actually through that experience, in one of my first classes, I remember it was related to professional development and learning, and our assignment for that specific class was to basically write like a 3,000-word essay around what does your future like, or what is your professional or personal development plan of like what do you want to do in the next 5 years, yada yada yada, the type of things that normally you have I guess at like your annual reviews at work of like, oh, where do you see yourself in the company next year, what would you like to achieve? But this was more about my life as a whole. And so I had to ask myself certain like challenging life questions, which I'd sort of completely avoided or not really paid attention to in the past, because I was still brought up, or I was still like abiding to the system related to work, where you start your job, work your way up, to the corporate or the food ladder, and then become director of whatever, what, and then hey, you've made it, woo, we've done it. Like that's where I was still operating there, and
it
then
was
after.
like the performance you were finding yourself in that was at the same time inspiring you. It was kind of a performance, all these moments seen as a performance, because I find it very interesting, the word performance, because you see this performance of things happening either in the system or around you, and you get inspired.
Yeah, and I think it's just I am today where I am based on all my various different experiences, and I wouldn't want it any other way, even though it was not the easiest of experiences. But I think for me, what was really fascinating with that master's is that it made me understand that I wasn't actually like pigeonholed into just one thing. And because also there was a whole conversation about what is a career, and I was like, wait, what is a career? Because I thought, oh, career is just like, you stay in that one space, you just work your way up and that's your career. Well, actually, no, it can be a whole host of different things. And from there, I think, because my background, I started as an interior designer. So that's my background where I started studying, because I love design and I love space. But that's where I started, and like where I am right now, that's not your normal or your usual like roadmap to get to where I am. But it's just over that period in time, I got introduced to one piece and another. And then I think ultimately it's always one of the things that I can say is that I actually just love interacting with people. I'm fascinated by people and wanted to learn and understand their story.
Yeah.
And
curiosity
I think
is the bridge toward unity. I read this beautiful quote this morning. It's impressive in mind. It's so true. Curiosity is the bridge for many, many, many things.
No, it definitely is. And I think it's just that aspect of rather, because nowadays everyone is just, me, always on my phone, just focusing on their bubble and not necessarily deciding to look up and actually see who is around me. Do I actually even have anyone around me? And I think what I'm noticing is that with especially the younger generations, they're so used to typing things, just having a one-to-one connection and interaction is actually much more challenging for them than we think. And for me, I love it. I'm the type of person, go out, like one of my best friends, she says, no, you're the person who always makes a best friend wherever you go. She's like, because anywhere I travel, whatever, she's like, yeah, no, where's your best friend of the evening, whatever. I was like, what are you on about? She's like, yeah, you just you're the person where I know we can drop you anywhere in the world, you'll make a friend. I'm with no doubt.
You're a magnetic,
okay.
Mbali. That's what it means. You're a magnetic person. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. But I think for me, it's one of those where when I think about it and upon reflection and hindsight, for the longest of time when I was younger, I was trying to fit in so badly and trying to basically transform myself as I call myself the chameleon as well, meaning that I am very good at just adapting to wherever I find myself. But along that journey, I sort of also lost myself. I didn't even know who I was to a certain extent because I just knew what to do or shift to make other people feel comfortable in my presence, but then forgetting to understand, wait, who is this person here up until, much later in life. But I think that definitely helped me be where I am now, where I'm fascinated and really just want to understand who is the person in front of me, because we all have different journeys. We all had different upbringings, conditionings, and just life stories to lead us to where we are now in the present. And I'm just fascinated how some people, or so many people, having such different backgrounds can then, for a split moment in life, have that connection point or find themselves in the same space where they were connecting, even though the background would have never normally made them actually connect with one another. And I always find that really fascinating. And
beautiful. And the adaptation is part of our intelligence. We must be empathetic toward the situation. So being adaptable and empathetic is part of our intelligence. Amazing, Mbali. Regarding this one-on-one connection, I believe so coaching means gaining also trust, both professionally and personally for you. So for those you coach, do you benefit from the opportunity to guide these relationships? And do you typically build long-term relationships or not with them? Are you still in touch with the people you create a connection with?
I think it really depends, because I think this is also something for myself that I'm working on is like, where do you draw that line of now we're moving from the professional to the personal? Because ultimately, even the one-to-one coaching within that professional space, like it's about, because I think the main key thing around that is actually having very clear understanding of what are the boundaries in which we're working in, right? So I think it's one of those things that maybe with certain individuals, those boundaries get crossed, but there was some mutual understanding. But for most of the time, I think for myself, it's more about I'm in that space of helping you. And if we never speak again afterwards, that's fine. Like it's not, for me, it's as long as I manage to help that individual achieve what they wanted to achieve, then my job is my job. It's not even about the job, but I feel like my work is done in that sense. My mission, yes, exactly. My mission is done. And if they're willing to, I'm always more than willing and open to continue that conversation. But I think it's just, yeah, people always just get stuck in like in different things, and then we all have our own lives, and sometimes you can like, you know, just lose touch. But I think, yeah, it's just about understanding the clear boundaries within what you're going to be working with in at that beginning, and then afterwards, once whatever the work may be, manage to understand, okay, are we going to still continue this no longer within that professional, like, you know, environment, or are we going to just let it be? And I think it's really just on a very individual, you know, person by person aspect, and just understanding it. Because I don't think everyone wants to be friends with their coach, even though I am an awesome person. Well, I'd like to think so. But for some, it's just literally, I just need someone to help me get to that goal. And that's it. Once I like move on, and that's okay.
Yes. Like, interesting, because of course I believe everyone has different experiences with their coaches. I was curious about you a lot. The next question is, what's people's most powerful weapon, in your opinion, Mbali?
Oh, that is a good
very deep one.
That is a very good one. For some reason, like this is the only, I'm trying to process like what can I say, but the only word that I have just like blinking in the front of my mind right now is just trust. Like that's the only thing that I just have right now.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's the only thing I have in my mind at the moment. But
why trust?
I mean, trust is because, you know, it's one of those things. And even for myself, I've been also going in my own personal journeys where trust, not even me trusting, but other people trusting me, and their view of me is changing now just based on everything that's happening at the moment. But trust takes time to build, can be broken in seconds. And I think it's just also one of those things in terms of a weapon. And the word weapon is so strong as well for me, but like it can be unfortunately used as a weapon, because if someone trusts you with their life, then you can, like, you know, you have a hold of that, you can have a hold of that person in such different ways. So I think, yeah, that it's a very powerful, like quote unquote tool, but yeah, trust.
That can destroy also everything. It can break the person in two, because as soon as we are not trusted, we don't trust ourselves anymore many times.
And I think it's that, and I think what's really beautiful and around trust is the fact that it has the potential of going either way, of creating something so beautiful out of it, but also destroying, as you just mentioned as well right now. And I think it's also a great like mirror to like just our lives as a whole, and our everything, you know, the duality of things, of like just looking at each sides of the coin. So yeah, trust.
Yes, beautiful answer, Mbali. I'm asking these questions because once a very important leader in the past asked me these questions, and I said failure. And so it's interesting how actually are both big weapon for the humankind, because failure, for example, you fail, then you learn, then you win, and then the rest really it is what really matters. That's my opinion, indeed, if you like it.
No, failure is also, I totally understand where you're coming from with failure, because society nowadays does use failure. Oops, I don't know what something just fell. But yeah, no, society does use failure as a weapon, because if you failed, it's like, oh well, you're not worthy of, you know. So I feel like failure has become weaponized, unfortunately, whereas actually just a means of learning
to stand up again.
Yeah.
See, and actually trust and failure can work together. So because sometimes, yes, they're deeply connected.
For sure.
Then, yes, Mbali. Another question for you. Let's talk about the ability of to influence relationships, connections, and interpersonal interactions to help drive business growth. And, for example, what would you say about this? How do you which is the main ability that is able to influence relationships, connections, and interpersonal interactions to drive businesses to grow?
I mean, to drive businesses to grow, but even just, I guess, coming back to just to drive to creating and forming relationships is yet again that aspect of creating. I think for me, it's about creating the rapport, and creating rapport comes back yet again to trust.
Yes, again.
And so I think for me, it's really around that, because when we think about businesses, I mean, people think about, the company branding, but ultimately business is made out of people. And so what are you doing? It's about connecting with those people that are linked to that brand, or linked to whatever mission and purpose they're trying to serve within this world. And yet again, it's about that connection and building that bridge and trust with that individual. And either being, if you have the same vision and purpose, you're like, okay, we can actually work together. But even for someone that you may not at all, see or understand their point of view or values, still just being able to create that rapport of I am going to still listen to what you have to say. So I think it's about having that openness.
Fundamental.
And just, it's all about relationships. I feel like this is one of the things my little sister also says, is that we came here on this earth to learn how to be in relationships on all spectrums, because people think about relationships more just from a romantic aspect in terms of being in a couple, but actually we're working with someone, that's also a different type. Friendships is a different type of relationships, being in a team, that's a relationship just expressed in a different matter. So I think for us it's more about understanding our various relationships to one another, pretty much.
Thank you so much, Mbali. I totally agree with you too. Very important to remind this. So regarding all this amazing coaching you're doing, what is a personalized development now plan that you can suggest here online that will help us to identify our strength and guide toward achieving our goals?
I do not have a cookie cutter one size fit all, or even trying to think about an answer right now. For me, it's just, it does, because no, I don't actually have one. And maybe it doesn't work with whereas I'm sure a lot of other kids think about this, think about that. And yes, there's a lot of different types of frameworks that exist. Yes, for sure. But I think for me, it's I more use the way that I approach things is more about having the frameworks in your back of mind to just support you, but it's more about just having the conversation with the person of understanding what is it you want to achieve. But even before getting to that, it's about understanding what you want to achieve. So having a clear understanding of what that goal may be. And I think the clearer you are, and actually when you start adding also quantifiable and measurable aspects around it, does help you get there in an easier way. But I think ultimately, because a lot of people, it's think about it from the side of I'm sure there's the New Year's resolutions, where I heard the other day about how there was a statistics, and I don't know who exactly did the research, but basically that by the 19th of January, let's say more than half, 50% of people have already stopped their New Year's resolution. And you're what, already 3 weeks in you were giving up? And I think it's really related to how do they actually formulate those goals? How do they set those goals? But then there's also a whole myriad of other things around it. And I think for me, and my approach around coaching is more, people just think about, come in, I want to have that goal, and that's it. And me, it's okay, we'll get to that goal, but just tell me about you as a person first. Let's just figure out the whole thing. Because I think a lot of times what happens is that people just focus on I just want to achieve this, I just want to achieve this, but they don't want to deal with to what is the main problem and challenges keeping them from achieving that goal. Because ultimately also means that you need to dig deep and like, you know, do personal development work and actually working on yourself or looking at things that you've been trying to like, you know, avoid or not really dig deep into. And it comes back to like shadow work, and that's how I look at it. And doing shadow work is not the easiest, it's not the prettiest, it's not like you no, it can be just, you know, when you're really like crying and like you stop coming out of your nose, and like it's not all glamorous, and then but it's what's required, with that piece, in my opinion and perspective of it, is like it's what's needed to be able to like come out anew. And once you show yourself as well, like, oh, okay, it wasn't actually that bad, like it seemed worse than it was, you know. And once you've managed to go over that hurdle, then the next time you go through something, or next time you start looking at something that you've been trying to avoid looking at, now you can look and just be more observant and just taking a third person like observer's view rather than fully identifying with it. And I think that's one of the really interesting things with us as human beings, is that we identify with so many different things rather than understanding like, oh, this is an action that I took, and taking that step back, taking that time to reflect. So like, oh yes, I did that, but it doesn't mean that that's who I am as a person. Yes, I made maybe a bad mistake, or I mean, wrong decision, mistake, whatever it may be, but that doesn't mean that that defines me in terms of my whole existence. But then, yeah, we unfortunately tie on to that and identify with it, and then make that define who we are, rather than just being able to take that step back. But I think it's coming back to the fact that we take everything, and I'm generalizing here, but a lot is about taking things personally. And I think, and that's where the ego, you know, the ego gets involved in that. And the ego is great because it's led us to get to where we are, and it helps you to, it's great for self-preservation, but you need to get to that point in time where you can actually be like, okay, ego, right now you're not doing me any justice. Right now you're actually keeping me, you know, at a lower like space or energetic like area than I need to. And it's about working around that as well. I feel like I went in full circle. Don't know if I actually answered your question.
Yes, you did. And I love the part of the shadows and again, emotional awareness, because we all have shadows and repressed emotions are not good. Why I asked you these questions is because many people follow these programs that are given on internet, how to coach yourself, and which can be useful sometimes, but it's so much better to go to your coach and just get these problems through properly, because being guided is so much better than sometimes being guided by those online programs which are not personalized. And it is impossible, as you said, saying it now, because the one-to-one connection is so different one from another. So thank you, Mbali, for this. So what would you say, how do we learn about the value of having self-awareness and practicing self-mastery?
I think it's just so, I don't have it with me right now, it's downstairs. So I have this book, it's called the Molecules of Emotion. But I think for me, it's just like, just being interested in understanding or wanting to learn more about why do we do the things that we do. So I love neuroscience. I'm a massive like geek in that, and neuroscience and neurophysiology, and just understanding the human brain and body and why do we operate the way that we do. And for me, that was actually one of the main sort of like epitomes for me to actually get into where I am right now. And it was actually thanks to one of my previous jobs where I was part of like the consultancy team and still focusing on like workplace strategy, but then going into behavioral change. And that aspect of behavioral change, like, why do we behave the way that we do? What is like, you know, what has led us to the conditioning, or what is, and learning about, you know, beliefs and other things like that. So I think for me, for anyone wanting to start off this journey, it's more just being open and interested of like about themselves in terms of the various different emotions that they experience. But then let's also go back to that, because unfortunately when it comes to emotions, and a lot of people that I've spoken to in the past, either you have sort of like two different like groups: those who are like fully throw themselves, you know, 100% in, and who will go and experience positive or negative emotions and go through the whole experience of it. And others are like, emotions, nah, not for me. I'm not a person who feels. I don't do emotions. Like, I mean, what do you mean you don't do emotions? And I've heard that quite a few times. I'm like, I don't do emotions. I'm like, okay. And then for those who don't do emotions, then as well, when it comes to their emotional, vocabulary is quite restricted. It's maybe restricted to 5 or 6, different words.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in terms of different emotions, we roughly can experience, I would say, and this is like one of those numbers, I'm sure since then the research has augmented, but last that I had read was like roughly around 32,000 different types of emotions. Because yes, you do have your core emotions, and think about it, about like your color wheels or your color palettes, where you have your primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Think about emotions being the same way, where within your primary, you have maybe your primary 4 or 5, but then you build on, and then that's where the complexity starts to come in, when things become muddled, and people tend to classify their emotions or say, oh, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad, or what. And it's not so clear, black and white. It's just
so in this case, self-awareness can be following our flows, accepting our flows for what they are, being aware, not fighting them. That's a way of self-awareness. A good point.
For sure. And I think for me, this around that aspect, to be able to really support it with just actually expanding your emotional vocabulary, because I think that's one of those things where a lot of people are just stuck in that, thinking that there's that 5 or 6 or 7 emotions that exist when there's a whole plethora. But also understanding like what are the combinations, because it's not black and white. It's not. And I think it's just about being able to understand the complexity, the also just the quick change of how emotions can, because ultimately the way that I always share it and think about it is saying, like, think about your emotions like if you were a captain, on your boat and your ship, or your ship, whichever vessel you want to choose. Think about your emotions as being the compass. So your compass is just going to direct you and give you a direction in regards to whatever destination that you're trying to achieve or get to. But in itself, the compass sort of meaningless without the destination and related to whatever you're trying to achieve. So think about also like your emotions of just directing your show or guiding you in which direction you're going. But ultimately, if there's nothing linked to it, so in this case, if there's no events and meaning that you give to it, it's just an emotion. But unfortunately, what happened is that, especially because for ourselves, when we link our emotions a lot to an event into memory, so it starts to create a different meaning. So the meanings around emotions, that's where there's like a lot of
starts with the emotion, but then with our mind we can process it and make it more of our awareness, not just
but we are actually the ones afterwards who give the meaning to it. Because if we were to just think about an emotion like that compass, irrespective of meaning, it's just there, it just flows through you, and it's just there to show you a direction. But a direction without a destination, what is that? So it's just one of those, it's just a direction, whether it's left or right. It's just a left or right. And so if people can manage to look at their emotions more from that approach, and coming back to what I was saying previously, like how we identify with our emotions, and the meaning that we give on top of that, that's where it really leads to the uncomfortableness. But I think it's also just because we haven't been educated to understanding and being able to take that step back of actually using our emotions more as a guiding system, and using it as that compass of like, am I following my true north? No, I'm not feeling actually in alignment with this. So maybe there's something I need to revisit here. And just using those as like more as your guiding system more than anything.
Absolutely. Totally. Regarding self-mastery, I would say is also an amazing tool to use is experimentation, because through experimentation there is innovation. So to practice this self-mastery, experimentations can also be a nice tool to adapt.
100%. And on that aspect of, in terms of the experimentation, I think the add-on bits and still linked to what I was saying previously, but for those who maybe don't know the different types of emotions, I think one great exercise, and I've done it myself, and it's really related to somatic, so this is like around emotions, but how they feel within your body. So let's just think, happiness is the easier one. If you just sit down, just calm yourself, think, and just think about what any type of happy moment that you've had in your life, so you close your eyes and just see what part of your body either tingles, or what do you feel in your body, and where do you actually feel it, and then do that with different types of emotions.
Experimenting, yes.
So coming back to that experimental, yes, that you were just saying right now. And so I remember when I was going through that process and actually understanding, because that also allowed me to educate me on where like how to connect the link between an emotional and a physical like reaction, because ultimately what we like, emotions are just like emotions, but then we have that physical expression of where it actually comes to. So you know, when sometimes you have like knots in your tummies or butterflies in your tummies, or even, for example, like a great example is how, like, you know, being like anxious or being like fearful or scared is also the same as when you're just having that the nerves, or like that tingliness of like about before you do something that's really exciting, you know. And in the body it feels the same way in terms of the same reaction, the chemical reaction within the body. But what changes with how we approach that physical, you know, reaction and expression is based on the meaning that we give to it. So, and I think that's really, and coming back to what I was saying previously about the meaning, is that everything is always related to meaning. And if you change and the story, because ultimately what is a meaning is the story that you tell yourself. And what's that story? It's that story is based on the belief that you had. Anyway, it goes down into that whole like that whole cycle there. But I think it's just about like educating on yourself and just doing it in bite sizing, because
the most important, Mbali, sorry to interrupt you, because the belief, the most important is to follow our own belief that can change a long time because we evolve, but not to follow others' belief, making it our own, because that's when confusion comes, because we are just basically delaying our inner power, thinking someone else's belief it's better than ours. Do you agree?
I do. And I think, but even before we get to that, I think it's one of those of taking that step back and actually understanding what are my beliefs? Because a lot of times, like, especially if you start
we never know. Yeah,
don't experiment and don't know. But I think it's also one of those things where over time, with our conditioning and being brought up in different, you know, just being brought up as a whole, where we now embody certain beliefs that are actually not our own, but it's just because that we were always surrounded around it and we've created and made it our own, but not necessarily getting to that point of actually now interrogating it and actually taking a moment to pause and think and be like, wait, do I still abide by this? Is that still my truth? Or is it one of those where it was my truth before because that was the context and, you know, the ecosystem that I found myself in, and it made it easier for me to believe that. But do I still believe it? Is it still my truth? And actually going through that. And I think just writing down a few like different types of beliefs and just asking your question, like, is this still valid for me? I think that's a great starting point.
Yes, amazing. Regarding all these emotions that we've been talking about, there is a big difference, for example, between a global experience and an individual experience. Because when it's global, things become very evident, which can lead to informed insight and practical tools to break, for example, an organization barrier. While if it is individualistic, it's so much more difficult to work on it because it's about us and there is not the power. So don't you find amazingly powerful these global experiences that can teach everyone what's happening just because they're global, and so they become very evident?
I think that one is a tricky one, because I think like, for example, even our situation in which we're finding ourselves currently in a pandemic, in terms of a global belief, we're there as well. There's been so many, you know, opposing views on what was quote unquote a global belief at the very, I mean, what was said, you know, 2 years ago to where we are now, how the science has evolved, how people have also changed their view and perspectives around it. Like, I think having a global belief can be definitely beneficial, but before we even get to that point, I think everyone needs to first do the work on themselves, to start on that individual aspect. And then from there, then you'll be able to see, oh, if there are other people from an individual aspect that actually connect on that same belief, then that's when you can start growing that community. But I think doing the other way around, of going from the global and coming back to this like individual, that's sort of like what we had in terms of when we were like being brought up, because when we were young, we didn't know what was right or wrong. We were always like observing and looking at what was around us, and based on whatever type of response we got would create beliefs. So we were going like being brought up as younger kids in that way, but now in hopefully in the possibility of actually like, okay, I am now whatever age it may be, but I want to become, become a master of my own being in that sense, and really just show sovereignty on who I am as a person. So first is about starting with the individual and the I, but not in the selfish way of a lot of people think, oh, you're just thinking about yourself. No, it's about actually understanding who I am to the very core. Also being acceptive of who I am to the very core, because I think a lot of times what happens is that we don't accept ourselves because we're always comparing ourselves to whatever
we have to make our purpose count. Is so important like Mbali is doing with her mission. Yes,
thank you. But I mean, it's not even I definitely make our time on this world count, but I think because I think one of the things I've noticed is like when we come into this world, and I know for myself, is like I'm seeing so many youngsters doing amazing things, and I'm just thinking like, what the hell have I been doing this whole time? Where I'm just like, wait, have I missed things? But it's not even about that. I think it's more about I think for me, if every person came on this planet and the only thing they ever actually did, besides doing the amazing other things that they do, if the only thing that they actually ever focused on was just saying, I'm going to focus and work on just knowing myself to my core and to the fullest, irrespective of what I think other people think I should be or whatever. No, just knowing me to my core and my true authentic self, we would be in a much different place at the moment than where we are. But unfortunately, it's one of those things where we're sold like, oh no, you need to go to school, you need to get a job, and so many external things that are taking away our attention from doing that personal work. And I feel like a lot of
people want to choose for us. It's true.
And other people wanting to choose for us as well, because it's easier. And I think it's that aspect there where it's easier to have someone else choose for us, because it means that I don't need to make a decision now. And if something goes wrong, I have someone to blame. So I don't need to take responsibility for whatever is happening to me. And I think that's the biggest challenge here, is about taking ownership and responsibility for yourself. And that's, I think, why it can be a lot challenging for a lot of people, is because when you do that, it means when when things go wrong, you need to take that responsibility of like, yeah, it didn't work out. But it's okay. But I think it's just because
the failure we're talking about.
Exactly.
To learn and to change and to grow.
And being okay with failure. And that's not an easy thing.
No. Mbali, I love talking to you. It's been an hour almost. I wanted to tell you, give us the last message of your wisdom before we, of course, say to our guests where to find you if they need an amazing coach for their mission and work or daily life. What's another message after this final discussion, for the final discussion we're going to have now?
Final message. I think it's literally of just being inquisitive and being open to learning about yourself.
Amazing.
As scary as it may be, get to know the awesome human being that you are, not what you want to project yourself and what you think other people want from you, but just get to know who the amazing person you are is. Pretty much.
Totally agree, because we all know in our hearts of the hearts that we are more than what we do for a living, or there are millions of shades of blue, for example, of colors, and there are almost no languages that which can be borrowed words from other languages. So it's like there is so much around it that we cannot really define ourselves, our being, for what we do in this present at all. It's very important. So people don't have to feel stuck. They have to be open-minded to feel also their inner powers. Being open-minded is another amazing skill to have.
And I think with the being open-minded, the challenge there is where you will hear things that you're like, oh, that doesn't really like, resonate with me, but it doesn't mean that now I'm going to reject what you're saying because it doesn't resonate with me. And I think being open-minded is a superpower. There you go. Being open-minded is a superpower in my view, just because it means that you're willing to hear other stories, other narratives, and being open to it.
Yes.
And I think nowadays we're in such a society where, and I think social media or the internet as a whole is a great example of like, if you don't abide or think or don't believe in what I think, then you are wrong and you don't know anything. And it's a great way to divide people. So I feel like if you're open-minded, that's the first step into bringing people together and wanting to hear each other's stories. And then from there, being able to break down, all the different layers and walls that we've created to divide us and separate us. So yeah.
Yes, Mbali, I find so powerful to have the opportunity in general to interact with like-minded women, even from different backgrounds, because it's like seeking to add value to the same main values we believe are right. It's incredible, very powerful in general. Thank you, Mbali.
Thank you.
Well, where can we find you on the media? Where can people be in touch with you?
Well, that's one of those things where like I know I need to be working also on my social media presence, because for the longest I'm still very old school.
You're doing many different projects. I know.
I'm still very much old school and like not really having like a social media presence and other things like that. But I'm working on it. I'm actually currently working also on just sorting out like an app actually related to my coaching
Beautiful
situation as well. But because no, I was going to say, so right now, like my website would be learntomove.com. So, but move is MOOV. And the reason why it's that is because it's basically an acronym related to manage your own outlook victoriously. So and then also the whole aspect around move, we're using movements and shifting and changing and moving from one emotional state to another. Anyway, so it's learntomove.com. That's basically my website at the moment.
Interesting that you're gonna have an app. Can't wait to watch it and to check it out.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too. And I think it's one of those things where, like I was saying previously, I might be very old school, but I know that in the world of today, I need to, get up to speed with all of that. And one of the things is related to actually having an app, because one of the things I was also working on was, having online courses and stuff. But I think nowadays having the ability to have something that's an app that is also interactive and also just with younger generations as well, because that's also one of my audiences and demographics that I'm basically working with or targeting as well. I need to be up with the times. So I'm on that process as well. I'm just like, working with that.
Let's spread this energy to all the people. It's so important to give awareness during a podcast, giving inspiration, giving strength. Beautiful, motivating too. Thank you so much for being at Wellness and Wonder, Mbali.
Thank you so much for having me. And like, this was really like, because I know I'm like, as you know, I'm not actually at home at the moment. So just even being able to do this, not in my usual environment, I was just like really like still excited about it. So yes, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Let's say hi to our guest. Bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you for listening.
Can't wait to see you again, Mbali.